Laura, thank you very much. And can I say what a privilege it is and a pleasure to be back at my old school, Haverstock Comprehensive. And I want to pay tribute to all of the young people, the fantastic young people at Haverstock, and also fantastic teachers, some of whom taught me, like Nikki Hayden, who we have with us today. It brings back great memories to be here, and I'm delighted that I can be. Haverstock inspired me with great teaching. It gave me a great education. And at Haverstock, I grew up with people from all walks of life. There's no substitute for that education and that experience. And I wouldn't be standing here today as leader of the Labour Party if it wasn't for the education and the values that Haverstock taught me. Now, everyone here will have a personal story about last week's riots and the feelings we had about what happened. Mine is that a week ago, near the route that I walked to school for 7 years on Chalk Farm Road, as I just saw at Evans the bike shop and at other places along Chalk Farm and Adelaide Road, there was rioting, windows were smashed, and stuff was taken. No part of London and no major English city seemed immune or safe from what happened. This week, though, I did what politicians don't do enough the rest of the time. I went out onto the streets and listened to people who came up to me and talked to me about their experiences and their feelings about what had happened. People told me their stories, their personal, powerful stories. And I just want to start by bearing witness to them today. Because it is only with the voices of people that we can begin to understand and start to solve the problems we face as a society. On Tuesday, I was in Peckham, less than 12 hours after the looting had finished. I heard from a young woman who'd made her way to university and who'd been walking home that previous night and who feared for her safety and said, something's got to be done about this. I heard from an old man who said, look, the problem is that government and politicians have deserted our young people. On Wednesday, I saw the fury of people in Manchester about what had happened in terms of the rioting. But I also saw the spirit of 1,000 people who had come out, yes, because of Twitter, that morning to show that actually the spirit of Manchester was something else. And they'd come out and cleaned up the streets of Manchester, cleaned up after the rioting and looting. On Friday, I witnessed a whole range of emotions when I went to Tottenham. Because that is a community that has done so much to build its reputation since the riots happened in 1985. And there people were saying to me, look, our worry is the world's going to turn its back on us after what's happened in Tottenham. What's going to happen to the reputation of Tottenham? And I met people like Alan Moore, a jeweller, and I went with him to see what was left of his shop. He'd spent 35 years building up his business. And you know all that was left was a safety deposit box standing amidst the rubble. And at the same time, I visited the leisure centre in Tottenham. And that was an inspiring sight. Because actually, it was about people, volunteers, coming out to say, we're going to help people who need to rebuild. Young people who actually represent the vast majority of young people right up and down this country. Law-abiding young people, and politicians need to say that because we don't say it enough. And on Saturday, I heard from people in Hackney, shopkeepers who had seen their businesses attacked, and people searching for answers. So I've seen and heard, as I'm sure you all have done, anger, grief and fear, but also seen hope, bravery and determination as well. Now, from almost all, as Laura said, I have heard nothing but condemnation for what happened. No excuses, no justification, because nothing can excuse and nothing can justify. And that's why it's right that tough punishments are being handed out. But I've heard, and you must have heard as well, something else. A deep desire to understand. A deep need to explain what happened. And when we first said 20 years ago, we need to be tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime, that speaks to what people have been saying to me on the streets too. And everywhere I've been, people are discussing the same questions. Why did this happen? What does this say about our country? What can be done now to prevent it happening again? Now look, there's an easy and predictable path for politicians. It might even be the more popular path in the short term. And yes, I heard some people demand it on the streets. It says the riots are criminality, pure and simple, and it stops there. It says that to explain is to excuse. If others wish to tread this path, that is a matter for them. But it's not the one for me. And I'll tell you why. Because it's not strength, it is an absolute abdication of responsibility to the victims, our communities and the country. But if we follow that approach, we run the risk of disturbances happening again. In fact, it is Bill Bratton, the former LA police commissioner, who said, "You cannot arrest your way out of this problem." And there's another path. Simply to blame others. Blame the parents. Blame the so-called underclass. Blame the police. And we've certainly seen a lot of that in the last few days, haven't we? Our police force already being undermined by cuts to the number of officers, undermined further. An unseemly attempt by government to take credit for operational decisions that went right and blame the police for those that didn't work out. So wrong. And the approach of blaming others, so simple, and yes, so simplistic. Instant and simple judgments in response to these sort of events bring bad solutions. Of course, the public says we want quick action. But a new policy a day, knee-jerk gimmicks, not thought through, they won't solve the problem. And let's be honest about the politician's instinct in this. Appoint a new advisor. Wheel out your old prejudices. But that won't meet the public's demand for real and lasting solutions. And yes, we've heard it all in the last few days. Water cannons, super cops, a daily knock at the door for gangs, and today more gimmicks. A prime minister who used to say the answer was to hug a hoodie now says the answer is to reform our health and safety laws. A crisis like this tells something about our political leaders. Day by day, the Prime Minister has revealed himself to be reaching for shallow and superficial answers, not the lasting solutions the country needs, based on the wisdom and insights of our communities. A strong response to restore order must be followed by real change. But to do that, we have to answer the most basic questions. Why are there people who think it's okay to loot and vandalize in their own neighborhoods, who seem to owe no loyalty to their communities, who think they have everything to gain and nothing to lose from doing things like this? The small minority who did this are not one race, one age group, one community. They are British people, from Brixton to Gloucester, Croydon to Manchester. And to answer what has happened, I say this. We have to state the most inconvenient truth of all. Yes, people are responsible for their actions, but we all bear a share of responsibility for the society we create. Governments, Labour and Conservative, powerful elites in politics, business and in the media, and all of us, me and you as well. Only by starting with this truth can we get to the honest answers our country deserves. I'm here today at Haverstock because the national conversation we need must start with the communities affected. In every place I have been to, there is the knowledge to solve these problems and the overwhelming desire to be heard. But I have also heard the suspicion, perhaps the legitimate suspicion, that this will be another example of politicians arriving at the scene of trouble and then melting away when the world moves on. People have seen the way my profession works before and are understandably cynical. Can we be different this time? That is the challenge for political leaders. Only if we give people who have been affected by this the chance for their voice and views to be heard. After every major disturbance from Brixton to Oldham that we've had in our history, we have had a commission to look at the causes. We must have one this time as well. A genuine national conversation. Not a group of MPs simply focused on policing and criminal justice as the government proposes. Not a review of government policy conducted by civil servants in Whitehall. Not a standard judicial inquiry made up of elites, such as we're having over phone hacking. We need an answer which comes from people themselves, that listens to the victims, that builds on their own experiences. If the Prime Minister wants to know the solutions, he should come to these communities and have the humility to listen. He should have nothing to fear from the truth. And the people leading this commission of inquiry must include those young people that we've talked about, those people with experience of being in gangs, people from across the community. And the hearings shouldn't happen in Whitehall or in the Palace of Westminster, but in the areas which experienced the riots and those that did not. Now, what are the issues that this national conversation needs to discuss? Let me, today, and I'm looking forward to your questions about this, let me put some issues on the table. Let's start by asking the questions of what values we saw from the looters and the rioters. Greed, selfishness, and immorality. Above all, gross irresponsibility. And the irresponsibility is not just confined to those who took part in the riots. We know there are big issues of personal responsibility too. I was appalled to hear about the parents who didn't turn up to court when their 14-year-old was charged with looting. As somebody I met in Hackney on Saturday said to me, angry about parents not taking responsibility, when the riots began, I made sure my kids were at home. Why weren't other parents doing that? The reality, though, the truth behind this is not simple. Some people say it's all about family breakdown. But there are single parents across this country, the vast majority of them doing an absolutely brilliant job. And by the way, there are some two-parent families doing not a very good job. Some people say it's all about the feckless at the bottom. But there are rich families unable to control their kids, and the vast majority of poor families who do control their kids. We must avoid wheeling out the old stereotypes and prejudices in this debate that suit one party or another. And we need to ask deeper questions about what causes this irresponsibility, about why some parents are not teaching their children the difference between right and wrong, not setting boundaries. I've heard on the streets a lot of times, let me be honest about this, people saying to me, you can't tell your children off anymore. But I do ask the question, who's telling parents they can't tell off their children anymore? Certainly not me. We need to ask why many young people don't have the role models that can put them on the right path in life. And we need to understand something else as well, something we don't tend to talk about. The link between the problems in our society and the economy we have in Britain. We need to ask what we can do about an economy where children don't see enough of their parents because they're working 50, 60, 70 hours a week, doing not just one job, but 2 jobs or 3 jobs, and not there when their kids get home, not there in the evenings. And the solutions won't be simple either. One of the most important things government can do is to back families up with programs like family intervention partnerships, family nurse partnerships, proper one-to-one support to help parents do their duty. But as we talk about what happened in the riots, we've got to be honest with ourselves. Children's ideas of right and wrong don't just come from their parents. And we can't honestly say that the greed, selfishness, and irresponsibility that we saw is confined to the looters or even to their parents. It's not the first time, after all, we've seen this kind of me first, take what you can culture. The bankers who took millions while destroying people's savings, greedy, selfish, and immoral. The MPs who fiddled their expenses, greedy, selfish, and immoral. The people who hacked phones to get stories at the expense of poor victims, greedy, selfish, and immoral. People who talk about the sick behaviour of those without power should start talking about the sick behaviour of those with power as well. Let's not pretend that the crisis of values in our society is confined to a minority only at the bottom, where we see the morality of millions of hard-working people under siege from the top as well. Let's talk about what that does to our culture. Too often we have sent a message from the top to the bottom of Britain's society that says anything goes, you are in it for yourself. As long as you can get away with it, who cares? We hear lots of talk now about role models for communities. But what role model has really been provided by the elites in Britain in the last few decades? So no, the values crisis is not confined to a so-called underclass in Britain. Our whole country is held back by irresponsibility wherever it is found. It can only be solved by addressing the issues right across our society, from bonuses to benefits. So the culture of our society does matter. And just as those on the left who dismiss arguments about culture are wrong, so are those on the right who dismiss the importance of opportunity and hope. It's true, as some people say, that people from comfortable backgrounds took part in the riots. So lack of opportunity cannot explain all of what happened. But come on, just because it can't explain everything, it doesn't mean it can't explain anything. And this is where a leader of the opposition needs to speak frankly. Of course, not everyone who grows up in a deprived neighbourhood turns to crime, just as not everyone who grows up in a rich neighbourhood stays on the straight and narrow. Individuals are responsible for their actions, and every individual has the choice between doing right and doing wrong. But there are connections between circumstances and behaviour. These aren't actually my words. They're the words of David Cameron in a speech 5 years ago. 5 years ago, he thought both culture and deprivation mattered. But last Thursday, he said in the House of Commons, this is not about poverty, it's about culture, and he repeated it again today. I have to say, I don't understand why he has changed his mind, why he has accepted a false choice between culture and opportunity. And maybe it isn't because his view of the world has changed, but his view of what would make him popular has changed. I am clear, both culture and opportunity matter. To explain is not to excuse. And if we refuse to explain what has happened, we will condemn ourselves to repeat it. Opportunity matters because we have far too many young people in our country who don't have the hope of a better future, who don't feel they have proper chances in life, a stake in society. Of course, the vast majority of young people were not rioting and do the right thing. But their decision to do the right thing does not absolve us of our responsibility to do the right thing by them and give them a hope of a better future. And in the battle to give hope to young people, we've got to be honest. With a minority, we are losing to the gangs that scar life in parts of our inner cities. And you've got to understand the deep nature of this choice that young people are faced with. I heard it everywhere I've been in the last week. Best put in Brixton on Friday. Some kids see the choice and say, wrongly, the gang offers them money, protection, and status. And some young people believe, that there isn't that choice available to them from another route. Just as we need tough action against gangs, we need to show young people there is another way. And that is harder when support is being taken away. I'm not interested in blaming one government or one policy or even defending one government. I'm proud of what the Labour government did to advance young people's chances. The New Deal, the minimum wage, rebuilding our schools. These changes advanced the cause of young people. Higher school standards, narrowing the gap in educational achievement, getting more people into university, building for the future with Sure Start. But we didn't do everything right, and we didn't reach everyone we should have done. But let's debate as a country, in the aftermath of what happened, how we build that better future for young people, because it is part of the answer. Issues like education and skills, youth services and jobs are important for diverting people away from gangs, criminality, the wrong path. And it does matter that young people think there is a grave risk to what I call the promise of Britain, that each generation can do better than the last. That's what the Prime Minister used to say too, and I hope he will say it again. And look, if I'm wrong, and hope and opportunity are irrelevant, then let us have the Commission of Inquiry reach that conclusion. Let's not be scared of seeking an explanation and hearing the answers. Let's be brave enough to find the truth. And it isn't simply that young people find it hard to get on. It's about something else as well. Something the last Labour government didn't talk about enough. Something this government doesn't talk about enough. And that is the unequal society that we live in. It is about the gap between what young people can expect and what seems available to others. They see a society glorifying those who make millions while they struggle to keep up. They see the cult of celebrity replacing the ethic of hard work. These are the parallel lives that we have in Britain today. The parallel lives of those who have so much and those who feel they have no stake in our society. We all want the chance to get on. But what if the chance to do that seem small and the rewards for success seem distant. If the rungs on the ladder are so far apart that you feel you can't possibly aspire to climb up. If we give the impression that what we value, that what we exalt are things out of reach of so many people, it leads to frustration. Never an excuse, never a justification, but a part of the explanation. A stake in society requires a ladder you can climb. A stake demands that the things you value be within reach. So I hope, as part of this national conversation that we need, we look at these deeper issues of inequality which scar our country. What I know is this. The most important thing for now is that we do not let these be the 7 days in August which shook our nation and then our nation forgot. That's why our national conversation is so important, reaching across the gaps in our society between the parallel lives I talked about. So I urge the Prime Minister to establish this commission of inquiry without delay. If he does not do it in the coming days, I will do it myself. It is right for the victims, it is right for the country, and it is right to build the society we need. Now look, in recent years we've seen 3 great crises in our national institutions: banking, parliament and the press. And now we've seen a crisis affecting our great cities. In each case, an irresponsible minority let down the majority of good, decent people. Each crisis showed a wider problem. Each crisis showed a country in need of deep-rooted change. But this crisis showed something else: our strength as a country to come together and respond. The people who came together to sweep our streets show how our country can unite. The people who reclaimed our streets show the true character of Britain. And it is that spirit of young people at Haverstock, that spirit of great teaching at Haverstock, that can help us build our future together. It is that spirit which our national conversation must draw on and build for the future. And it is that spirit that gives me hope for the future. Thank you very much.